Welcome everyone. Dr. Tameka Ellington here. Welcome to another episode of Student Access 101, where we discuss critical conversations in the pursuit of equitable education for students who are underrepresented. I am Dr. Tameka Ellington, your host. For those of you that don't know me, I am a motivational speaker, educator, scholar, researcher, and a lover of all things educational growth. And so today's topic that we're going to be talking about is all about social justice in the classroom. I know oftentimes any types of politics or religious types of conversations are typically left off the table. However, there are some things that we do need to talk about, things that are happening in our community. We need to talk about those things that might have an impact on our students' livelihood. We need to talk about those things and be open and ready to discuss in our classrooms. And so my guest today is someone that I had the pleasure of meeting briefly. I was giving a tour of the Textures exhibition that I co-curated with Dr. Joseph Underwood, which is being featured at Kent State University's museum. I was doing a tour and had an opportunity to meet this person. And her name came across my desk once again because I was talking to a friend of mine about wanting to do a show all about social justice and education. And so this particular person came up, and her research like centers around different types of topics such as gender, race, LGBTQ plus concerns. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to welcome her here with us. And actually, you know what? I'm just going to say this. I haven't been on in several weeks, and I'm so thrilled to be back on with you guys. It's probably been about 4 or 5 weeks. I've been having other things happening. So I decided to take a little bit of a break, but I'm going to be coming back again as much as I can on a weekly basis or on a bi-weekly basis to interview amazing people that are really invested in wanting to learn more and wanting to teach more about student access. And so my next guest is an educator. She is a counselor and a social justice researcher. Her name is Dr. Adrienne Erby. Welcome, Dr. Irby.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. It's good for you to be with us today. It's good to see you again. I'm glad I'm going to get a chance to actually talk to you.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm going to read your bio so that our audience can learn a little bit more about you and the work that you've been doing. So Dr. Irby is an assistant professor of counselor education and supervision at Kent State University and a licensed professional counselor in Ohio. She currently practices at True Rob Counseling and Consulting, LLC. Dr. Irby's work centers on bridging cultural gaps in counseling, training, and practice to promote individual, relational, and community health and wellness in minoritized communities. Her research focuses on critical cultural and social justice issues in counseling and counselor education, including a focus on race, gender, and LGBTQ plus health and wellness, identity development, and educational practices, fostering cultural competence. Our conversation will be well-rounded, and so I'm so excited again to be able to have her on. And I see a friend of mine that's on, Shanetta Trundle. Shanetta is actually an old student of mine. She graduated from Kent State University several years ago. What's up, Shanetta? It's nice to see you. Nice to see you on. But I'm going to, of course, represent Kent State University like I always love to do. I'm going to put the emblem on and represent my home school and represent Dr. Irby's current school where she's at. You originally came from Ohio University, right?
Yes. So
Yes.
Ohio University, 2015.
Okay.
And just started here at Kent this past year.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, they are lucky to have you. So tell us a little bit more about you, where you grew up and how you grew up.
Oh, that's quite a question. So in terms of where I grew up, I was born outside of Chicago, in Harvey, Illinois, and family's from Chicago. We've lived there for a long time, still have family out there. but historically, most of my folks are from Mississippi. So Louisville, Mississippi, out in the country. I spent probably every summer there. Was just there this past week, and
Yeah.
I consider myself a little bit of a Mississippi person.
Okay.
Born in Chicago, grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then probably when I was, how old was I? Maybe 10 or 11, moved to Lancaster, California, so up in the valley. And then in middle of high school, moved to Fort Worth, Texas. So
Oh, wow.
a little bit of everywhere. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
good and bad.
Yeah. Was your family a part of the military or something?
So my mom was military, but that is not why we moved. My dad was a teacher, and
Okay.
so he went to Tulsa for school, and then we just kept moving to other places, different churches, different communities. So for me, I would say that's a part of where kind of my interest in understanding people, how they fit, where they fit, what belongingness is, how you make meaning of who you are, where you
Yeah.
are. I'm sure
Yeah.
that comes from that experience of moving and adjusting and readjusting time and time again.
Yes. 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 So we are all led by different experiences in our lives to take career choices that we take. And I would love to know, like, what was it that led you to wanting to study social justice, and how did you get into counseling?
Good question. When it comes to counseling, I would say partially that's my dad as well.
Okay.
So he became a pastor later, but before that, he was a social worker.
Okay.
And like many kids, I came along with my parents to work at different points.
Yes. Yeah.
And my dad enjoyed his job. He loved being a social worker. He will still sometimes identify himself as a social worker.
Yeah.
And so really just seeing that environment, he worked at a children's hospital in Oklahoma. And so we were just there with the rest of the kids.
Yeah.
And so that was a part of the interest. But in college, I took a course my first year in college called Minority Group Relations. And it was
Okay.
within the sociology and psychology area. And pretty much all we did was come in and talk about issues of race and class and gender and sexual orientation and religion. And I was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And it was exciting. You had people talking from different perspectives, different identities, and we really got into the nitty gritty of lived experience as well as structural and social things.
Mm.
And this was really more of a senior class. I don't really know how I got in. I'm sure somebody made a mistake and I was in that class. But it really like set the path for me, and that shifted me into counseling. And I was like, I want to figure out and help people who are marginalized and minoritized to be well.
Yeah.
That's really a big part of it for me. So,
Yeah. And,
class.
absolutely. And that is something that we struggle with, especially people of color. We struggle with this whole idea of going to see a counselor or going to see a therapist. And so it's always exciting to see other people of color that are in those fields, because oftentimes too, if we do go, we would rather go to someone who looks like us. And so it's a blessing to be able to have you in that field so that you can service the people.
It makes a difference.
Yes.
The practice that I work with is, I think all the counselors are Black. And that's even in terms of how we do supervision, how we do consultation or just check-ins. There's a cultural element to it that's just comfortable.
Yes.
I think clients seek that out. I have a large population of my caseload that's Black women. And what we see in terms of the research, what we know about Black women and how they hold stress and carry stress and their expectations of other people in terms of the roles that they're supposed to fulfill. Yeah, I get why you come here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's such a joy for me. And that's been the most, I love teaching, but my joy is counseling my Black women clients and giving them the space that sometimes doesn't exist in so many other environments.
Yes. Have you had an opportunity to meet Dr. Angela Neal Barnett?
I have not, but I keep hearing the name. So
you need to meet her. You need to meet her. She's a dynamic woman. She's actually one of my mentors, I truly believe. And you guys probably have heard me talk about this over and over again, but I believe in the essence of being in the presence of mentors and what they can do for your life. Always have mentors. And have mentors in different areas of your life, because not everybody's going to be able to give you one thing, right? So it's always important for us to have mentors in our lives, because if we want to grow, we got to have people in our lives that have gone and been where we want to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's wonderful. You'll love her.
And
Yeah,
actually,
you'll love her.
the person who owns and really manages the practice that I'm with, she was a mentor of mine at Ohio University. And
Okay.
truly, when I say that woman, when I grow up, I want to be like her.
Aw.
Just the way, she's like, no, just do it. This is what you want. Okay. What's the question? What are we discussing? Go do it.
Nice.
And like, I love this. And
Yeah.
that freeing piece, particularly just having that kind of support and mentorship, it makes such a difference in terms of learning, career development, and just whole personhood.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so the topic of social justice is a very broad topic. It runs the gamut of human rights and the distribution of wealth and opportunities and privileges for all people. I myself am a firm believer that it's incredibly important for our teachers to discuss social justice issues in the classroom, because they are the ones that are with our children 6 hours out of the day, right?
Mhm.
They're the ones that have a huge influence over our children and what their adult perceptions will eventually be when they grow up. So what are your thoughts about adding social justice topics in the curriculum of K through 12 schools? What would be some of the benefits?
So I think in terms of the benefits, it's discussing the world as it is instead of this very pretty, simple picture that's missing so much of the story and the richness and the diversity that exists.
Absolutely.
I feel like when we talk about it from particularly an educational standpoint, it's very linear, straightforward. It's singular. It's largely white. It's largely male and masculine. It's largely war driven and militaristic. And I'm like, there's so much more that's happened that we could be talking about.
Absolutely.
I mean, and what I hate is that we wait until people go to college, if they go to college, to give them that exposure.
Yeah.
I just think that's such a missed opportunity, because you don't have to go to college to vote. You don't have to go to college to go to the library and learn.
Absolutely.
No, this should be a part of what we do, because if we are, what I frequently, and even when I say talking to my representatives about some of the bills that have been coming in, like, if you want to create citizens and people that are engaged and active in citizenry, you need to teach them about it instead of just giving them this like watered down or one-sided, like hollow. That's kind of how I think of it, is hollow history. Like the soul, the meat, the richness is gone. Like, what are we doing? We're learning dates and nothing else.
Wow.
So for me, I think that's a big part of it, is just looking at what is. I think another part of it is that social emotional piece. Like, we want to create whole people. We want to
absolutely
maybe support and foster whole person development within the schools. Children are coming into the schools. Children and youth are coming full of richness, amazing ideas, amazing brilliance and joy, and considerable trauma.
Absolutely.
And we need to hold space for that, because sometimes the school is the primary space for them to have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that when we miss out on talking about the identities that are a part of being a whole person, again, it's hollow.
Yeah. It's interesting that you call it hollow, because when I think about it, I think about not only the fact that it's have you ever heard of something called hidden curriculum? Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of hidden curriculum? So it's kind of like that, right? It's that hidden curriculum. So for those of you that don't know, hidden curriculum is the curriculum that the majority try to leave out because they don't really want us to know about it. So for instance, something that has been now hidden curriculum is this whole idea about critical race theory in schools. So they're doing their best to make sure that our schools aren't talking about critical race theory, which they really weren't in the first place. But this is like a recent example that everybody can probably pull from about what hidden curriculum is, right? And so that's really what you're talking about, that empty curriculum, right?
And I I think about it in the sense of there's always been something to be banned from schools.
Ah,
From evolution and the Scopes trial to critical race theory to gender diversity.
yeah,
There's always something that people are trying to keep out because that shouldn't be a part of education. And I'm like, but if that is life,
right.
why would that? And for me, that's a part of the social justice piece, because when I think of social justice, I define it as, looking at issues of inequitable access and inequitable participation. And
Yeah,
social justice is saying, okay, we need to be equitable in the ways in which we navigate, manage, allocate, respond to issues of access and participation.
yeah,
And if we're not doing that, then we're trying to maintain a power system that was set up to only benefit certain students, only meant to benefit certain individuals, only meant to benefit certain identities. And if that's what we want to do, then let's please just say that so that it can be real clear. But instead of pretending like, yes, this is a open and inclusive, supportive space, children are not stupid.
absolutely. They're not. They're not. They're much smarter than what we think they are.
They see right through us. And so to be able to have honest and open conversations about that through education, and again, using existing curriculum, not making up events, we're using real events.
Right.
That's part of being real.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the social emotional aspect of it, because K through 12 schools across the nation, one of their goals is to help to foster that, what they call SEL, or that social emotional learning in our students. And it's to the detriment of the truth in many ways. I look at social justice as just the truth, right? It's whatever is happening, it's the truth. And so the kids need to know the truth. And so wrapped up in this topic of social justice is the equity and inclusion of our LGBTQ plus students. Kids are coming out earlier and earlier in age now. Before, people will wait well into their adulthood before they came out. And so now we have kids that are coming out really early in life, right? A good friend of mine, her daughter just came out and she was only 12 years old. And she came out, and the courage that it took for her to do that is just amazing. But then also to the reactions that she got left her scarred in many ways, emotionally, mentally scarred. And so what can schools do to support students that may be suffering from isolation and mental health issues due to their social experiences of being a person that is a member of the LGBTQ population?
I appreciate you sharing about that. And the first thing that I want to say with kids coming out younger and younger and sharing more about themselves, I think part of it is that they have language that they didn't have before. And that's such a big piece, because when you are describing, like, I knew this earlier, but to say what? How would I have said that? Giving that language is something that just helps them better explain more of who they are to us, as opposed to it being something that they have to kind of explore and try to define in their little corner by themselves. And I feel like that's, in some ways, that's a part of the connection of it, is the language. They're like, yes, finally, I got it. I know what this is. So that's one piece. But I think in terms of what schools can do, part of it is just providing open space to actually discuss it. One of the things that we see in terms of national reports is students are encouraged to share things and then shut down immediately. It's like, oh, share things, but not that. And so there's this mixed message, and they don't really know what's safe, who's safe, what should I share, what shouldn't I share, or should I only share these things? And it becomes this extra work, extra like brain space that they have to do to kind of figure out who's safe, who can I actually talk to. So one is just being open and creating space, and then being able to respond to that. And that being able to respond has to do with our own stuff as an educator, as a counselor, as a nurse, whoever you are within the school context. Work on your stuff. Don't make that the kids' issue. So that's one piece. I think another thing, and there's so much pushback to it, but what used to be, I don't even know if they're still called gay straight alliances anymore, I think they still are, but GSAs and other kind of clubs or organizations where kids can just come and talk very honestly and openly and kind of be themselves.
Right, right.
You don't have to do a lot of the pretense or questioning, or they don't have to figure that piece out. It's
Yes.
going to happen in a group of people. Like, you're going to have to navigate a group of people at any time, and personalities, all that stuff is real.
Yeah.
What we hope you don't have to worry about is who you are and your identity. I want that to be the thing that you're worried about. I want you to figure out who you are as a person, what you like, what you don't like, instead of trying to hide or mask or carefully choose your word. I don't want that to be your worry at 12.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, one other piece. And again, I feel like there are so many like national kind of chapters, and maybe not chapters, but sources of support and connection where you don't have to build things from scratch. I think sometimes the thing that educators are like, okay, I've got to create something magical. Nope, just tap into the resources that already exist. Send an email, make a phone call, creating even something very simple of, here's a little card that has a number of different LGBTQ plus affirmative phone numbers, suicide hotlines, any number of things that you don't have to invent, just accessible. And that's a part of what that can look like.
Yes.
And I think another thing is just recognizing that this is a long standing, like queer and trans folks have been around, right?
Absolutely.
This is not like a brand new thing. And the more that just because I'm a little history nerd, part of what has been exciting for me is learning more about like the Mahu of Hawaii. Like, these multiple gendered people were considered sacred and valued. When something happened, which we call colonization.
Yeah.
Wait, why didn't we ever learn about this? And then it's like, oh, well, you hear about this person. Thinking about so many of our Black civil rights leaders who were gay and bi and lesbian, and it's like we knew it wasn't like secretive. And so it's seeing these folks and who they were and what they did, as opposed to hiding, again, parts of themselves, because that's what we teach kids then.
Yeah.
And then we'll appreciate this thing that you did. But that. And it's that compartmentalization that I think is where young people, especially, they always move us forward. Like, that's like the previous generation, we serve to anchor. We serve to anchor them, give them support and structure. And they exist to question us and structure and give us new ideas. And it's that multi-generational thing that I think is a very particularly like Black thing, that generational piece. And I would say most groups of color, that's just a generational piece, that past, present, and future connection. Relying on those traditions as opposed to looking to the systems of power and the systems of whiteness that have actually been harmful. Sometimes I think we tend to be like, okay, well, we can only get that information from these spaces. And I'm like, no, there's a long legacy and long history of how folks of color have been loving and supporting all of us.
Yeah.
We have that history. So let's lean back on that.
You know, something that came to mind while you were talking is I think a lot about spiritual deities, especially in African cultures, the Yoruba people, in particular from Nigeria. Some of the deities were individuals who were born with both sexes, right? And because they had both sexes, they could really add to, or they had these special powers that could transcend, normal human beings, right? And so it's amazing to me to think about how, like you said, this has been something that's been happening for a long time, right? We're just now catching up to it.
And I think too, with what you say as far as catching up, part of it is we're rediscovering what's been buried. And so I'm like, why did we bury this? Who buried it? For what purpose?
Right.
And it's like, thinking about whether it's intersex, trans, multi-gendered, whatever, they have a history. And
Absolutely.
it is, again, uncovering what has been covered. And there's there's an intentional piece to that covering.
Absolutely.
And then, which means that there has to be an intentional piece to that uncovering, that relearning. And so I think excavation of our histories and through that, it's an excavation of ourselves and our sense of peoplehood.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
and I know we have more questions, so I could keep going, but I'm going to stop.
Oh no, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. On June 27th, here in Akron, we lost a 25-year-old male, Jalen Walker, when police shot and killed him. When these types of unfortunate incidences occur, it becomes critical to be real with students in the classroom, because kids are at home and they're hearing it from their parents. They're hearing their parents talk about it, and kids want to know what's going on. And as teachers, I believe we have the responsibility to be real about those kinds of things. And so, what might you recommend as approaches that schools might take when talking about these really sensitive topics?
So one is the deep breath that I just took.
Yeah.
And making space for that breath. Because what will often happen is that we will hold that trauma, that tension, that fear, that worry about which relative that person looked like in us, in our bodies, and we're tense and we're uncomfortable and we're anxious, like all of those things. And part of that is what we call like racial trauma.
Absolutely.
You know, that exposure to someone that looks like you, that could be you, that could be your sibling, your family member. We hold that in our bodies. It has an impact on our stress responses. It has an impact on our immune system, like all of these things that it impacts. So one is just knowing that that's a part of it, and helping students to ground themselves and be able to talk openly.
Right.
Ask the questions that they want to ask. Doesn't mean you have to have the answer. Sometimes the answer is, I don't know. I don't know why this keeps happening. Yeah. And that's an honest response versus a pat response that sounds really informed and, again, hollow.
Absolutely.
Being real, being authentic, being scared, recognizing that these are normal responses to awful, terrible things that keep happening over and over and over and over and over again. And so making space for that, I think, is an important thing. But also using it as an educational tool, connecting it to things that have happened in the past.
Yeah.
Again, I feel like history gets such a bad rep. But there's so many ways that you could connect that. You could connect that in a history lesson or social studies curriculum. You can connect that in literary, like so many different things. And I'm just going to give a couple of quick examples. And I usually share these with students, particularly those who are going into schools as school counselors, because the idea is that, oh, this might be too much, or the kids are going to feel this. There are so many things that I have seen online in terms of what people have shared, what they've done in their classrooms. One is a resource that was connected with, it's called Freedom on the Move, and it's a collection of different universities, and they basically gather these newspaper clippings, these recorded news clippings of runaway ads for runaway enslaved people. So,
wow.
And so one of the things that was so cool, and it's maybe like a 5-minute video, but a teacher shows how she used it in a literary sense, where she had them read aspects of Harriet Jacobs' incidents in the life of a slave girl, read one of these ads, and create a narrative based on a person that the students found. And so they created these rich and like full narratives. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the creative juices.
Yes, yeah.
Like seeing those who were liberating themselves and seeing that as an expression of not just, the literary skill that we need you to get, the creative thinking skill, understanding narrative, like there are these academic skills that are part of that.
Yeah.
Seeing yourself in that way, and not just as an enslaved person, or we usually would get, which was a slave.
Right.
That's one way. And so it's connecting that, there has been racism, there has been white supremacy, there has been violence, and there has been trauma here in this space, on this land that we all still occupy. Let's look at how that's been responded to in the past in different ways. There was another one from the Smithsonian the National Museum of the American Indian. And it was a bunch of kids reviewing the materials, the original documents of like, this seems really unfair. I don't know why they did this. Why did they remove these? And so you see voices talking about how they like, this doesn't seem right. Why did we do this? And so asking questions that a normal person would ask.
Yeah.
Letting them kind of wrestle with it. And guess what? They are okay.
Yeah.
And instead, we are building their critical thinking skills. We're encouraging them to, again, become an educated citizen so that they can critically look at what their government has done, how they can respond to their, like, all of these things are part of the needs that we see as we respond to these acts of state-sanctioned violence.
Yeah.
And I know people are afraid of using that terminology, but it's hard to call it anything else. And so, again, making the space for the emotional piece, connecting it with the educational piece. And when it comes down to students sharing and being open and expressing their views, being ready to support and defend them. That's a part of empowerment. You can't just say what you want, and I hope it works out.
Right.
Be there with them, because that shows them, again, that you're safe. That's what says, I can talk to this teacher. I can talk to the school counselor. And that's an important part.
And that's a very empowering thing for teachers to be able to provide for their students, is to stand up for them, and I think that's amazing. We would hope that more teachers would do those kinds of things, that they would stand in their power and stand up for their students. So,
and it's hard. I don't say it as a easy, like, go out and do it. It'll be fine. One of the other resources that, and I'm happy to share these afterwards, but through African American Policy Forum, they had a panel that was specifically talking about educators and what they had been doing. And educators who had been harmed, who had been fired, who really talking about, here's what I tried to do, here's what happened, and really sharing a lot of narratives, a lot of resources and things that have helped them, as well as ways that you can support and advocate for it. So again, there's stuff there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to try and make everything new, but you can figure out what your power looks like. Identify your supports, identify those people who are going to back you as you back your students.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's such a big thing, is realizing that you don't have to do it by yourself. You don't have to make it out. People have got you.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to be winding up in just a moment, but would you mind giving a word of encouragement to our faculty, students, teachers, staff who might be listening and desperately trying to implement some of these social justice practices into their curriculum and getting pushback? Like, what can they do? Like, what are some things that they would be able to possess to allow them to continue to move forward?
So I think one piece, well, let me start with a word of encouragement. In terms of encouragement, you showing your students who you are is so powerful. You showing them the power that you have and that they can have. Part of what I loved about those stories is how students and parents rallied around these educators.
Yeah.
They were like, no, you can't tell me. No school board can tell me that this person does not have my best interests at heart.
Right.
I've seen them take the fall for this. I've seen them make space for me. You'd be surprised how much of an impact that you have. So embrace it and recognize, which I think is the other part of this question, recognize that there are risks to this.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and there are a few books, and I'm trying to remember titles now. I'm like, oh no, my memory is failing me. But there are books that are specifically focused, particularly on Black educators in Reconstruction era.
Okay.
The stories, the narrative. I'm like, these were some powerful people. We have faced a lot before. Marginalized folks have been teaching, training, educating, empowering, mentoring folks of all identities for years, for generations, in the face of considerable, not only political and economic and career backlash, but physical violence. They have persevered. And that's not to say, yes, endure all. I'm not saying that. But we have a history to fall back on. We
Yeah.
have cultural, generational resilience, knowledge, strength, power, wisdom that we can fall back on and rely on. And
Yeah.
using that to support and uplift you, but also sharing that. Because again, there's been reason to cover that. And the more
Yeah.
that we excavate that, the more that we see how we have been doing this for years, I feel like that's empowering in and of itself. It is empowering.
Yeah.
The students to see that, like, yeah, we can do this. And you're
Yes.
like, and that young energy, like, we sure can.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
it's empowering, it's infectious, and it just builds and it creates waves that are hard to ignore. And the more that we connect and collaborate with one another, build these coalitions, that's a part of what I think makes systemic change.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And as you were speaking, what came to mind for me was just letting teachers, staff know that they have more control than they think they do. Oftentimes, I believe we get caught up in not wanting to say anything because we don't think that we have control. And we don't think that we have the power to say anything because we may be afraid of losing our job or whatever the case might be. And so I think that when we stand in our power and stand in our integrity, right? It's difficult for people to question that, because if you're standing in integrity and if you're standing in the truth, it's going to eventually come to the light, right? You know, and so our teachers that are watching, you have more control than you think you do. You have more power than you think you do, and you should use that power wisely because our kids need you. And so is there anything that we didn't touch on that you might like to speak about?
I mean, we covered quite a bit.
Yes.
um, I think just the importance of, and I probably should have mentioned this with the last piece, the importance of self and collective care as a part of
Oh,
it.
yes,
You're not
absolutely.
just, and I'm like, okay, the counselor, you better say that, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But that, like, you can't fight on empty. You can't
Mhm.
resist on empty. You have to create joy. You have to find joy. You have to experience joy. You have to connect and get that input from other people. You have to rest.
Yeah.
You have to fuel, whether it's through food, through whatever works for you. Like, all of those things are a part of refueling, retooling, and resisting. And
Yeah.
so all of those pieces have to be a part of your intentional plan. Because if you think, well, once we fix this problem or once we do this, then I can rest,
Mm,
you will never rest.
absolutely.
There will always
Absolutely.
be another problem.
Yeah.
You know what? Systems of oppression are really hard to just destroy. They're really hard. So there's always going to be something. But you, particularly for those who are minoritized in whatever ways, you're often not the prioritized. That's for me the difference. I use the term minoritized and prioritized. You are
Mm,
not prioritized. Sorry. That means you have to prioritize you.
absolutely.
And that's, I think, the hardest thing is that we see so many brilliant and amazing educators, counselors, helpers who burn out. They're exhausted, they're tired because they have served everyone and didn't make space to care for themselves and to get that care from others, or were
Hmm.
willing to receive that care, any number of things. So
Yeah.
care, just care.
Yes, absolutely. I think about my experiences and how difficult stand up for my students as well as stand up for my fellow colleagues. And I got to a point in my still too much for me, the constant fight. I think you really have to have a passion for that fight, right? You
Mhm.
really do. In order to continue with that fight, you have to have a passion for it. And for many, many years, I had a passion for that. And there was nothing that I wouldn't do for my students. There wasn't anything I wouldn't do for my colleagues. And, once mentally, you have to know when to take yourself out of those spaces, right? So that's also another way to take care of yourself, is knowing when, you need to sit back for a moment and let other people fight.
Absolutely. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you brought that up. That's
Yeah.
such an important thing. And I always think of power and agency as
Yeah.
a part of that. I have the agency to step back.
Yeah.
Yes, I see this as a problem. Do I have the capacity to manage that right now? And instead of
Right.
trying to force yourself through it,
Right.
sometimes that is the care that's needed. That is the power. That is what
Absolutely.
sustains you. And so it really is a constant intentional practice of care for yourself and care for others. And
Absolutely.
there has to be some balance with that. So thank you for bringing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you so much. I'm glad I got a chance to know you a little bit more.
Thanks.
But yeah. So where can people reach out to you if they want to get in touch with you, or where can they learn more about what you're doing?
So I'm probably the least connected person on social media. Um, but I will say now I'm not as great in the summer, but normally I'm pretty good with email. So my Kent State email, I'm happy to share that.
Yeah.
That's public information that's online. So it's airby@kent.edu.
A Irby
Yes,
at kent.edu.
yes. And so that's one
Okay.
of the places to reach me. I would say that's probably the best place to reach me. The only time that I don't respond is when I am with my family.
Yes.
that's
Yes.
that's part of my rest and restoration. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. Do I have it? Do I have it correct? Is this your
yeah.
email here? Okay, perfect. So this is how you can connect with Dr. Irby. So
Thank
thank
you
you
for
so much.
that.
I appreciate your time and spending a moment with us to discuss, some really important topics.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate just the space. And again, the same thing that we were just talking about, making the space. So
Yes. Yes.
appreciate you for all you do. All
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a good night.
right, you too.
And so, everyone that's listening, this is the part of the show where I dive a little bit more into the research. Every time I get ready for one of these interviews, I do a little bit more preparation, research. As I mentioned before, I am an educator, I'm a researcher, and it's important for me to have some information to back up what the topics are going to be talking about. And so, I'm going to place on the screen a resource. So this is the resource that I used when I was in the process of preparing for this interview. Social Justice in the Classroom, How Teachers Inspire Students to Be Heroes by Lori Brooke. And she speaks about the importance of equipping students so that they can have the agency and feel the power that they can change the world. And so she mentioned 7 different points in her article, but I'll point out just 4 of those that really align with the discussion that we were having today. And so one of those is she says, support students' identities and make it safe for them to fully be themselves while building and drawing on intergroup awareness. And this is something that Dr. Irby was just talking about. She was just talking about the fact that it's important for our teachers to provide a space for students to just be who they are. Another thing that she talked about was, as teachers, be honest about who you are and your biases. And also Dr. Irby brought that up. And it's important that teachers not be afraid to talk about issues that they might be facing, and don't be afraid to discuss their biases, because we all human beings, we all have biases about something. Another one that she talked about was encourage students to question everything, including their teachers. And Dr. Irby also brought this up. So a great teacher is never ashamed to be taught by her students. And I loved whenever I was in the classroom and my students taught me something new. I was over thrilled. It brought so much life to me. I mean, they were the ones, hey, when I was in class, my students were the ones that kept me up on the latest slang. They kept me up on what was happening with fashion. Even though I was a fashion professor, those young people, they'd be on top of it a lot faster than I do. And they used to keep me updated on what was happening. And so this is my favorite one, of course, because I love being with students. And one of the things that is important as an educator is feeling that you are in control of your space and allowing your students to also feel as though they can be in control of the classroom or space. And so I really hope that you all enjoyed this episode. And I'm hoping that you can spread the message to other educators that might be able to use this message. This episode of Student Access 101 is brought to you by my book, Be the GOAT, Career Readiness Manual for First Generation Students and Young Professionals, Please support my mission to provide critical skills to 1,000 students by the end of this year. I am a third of the way there. You can purchase a copy of this book on Amazon. If your school is looking to purchase this book in bulk, you can reach out to me at info@drtamekaellington.com. A course for this book is coming out very soon, so please be on the lookout for that. And so thank you all for listening. Thank you all for hanging in there for the whole 46 minutes that we've been on. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and comment on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Circle in people that may be able to benefit from the message. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. YouTube channel is Student Access 101, the podcast. Together, we can change the trajectory of equitable education for underrepresented students. And as always, as I say, let's empower, let's educate, because there's no success without student access. Have a good night, everybody.